Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
I'm impressed how desperate you all are for speakers. I've been instructed to carry on with chapter 2 of. Is this turned on? No.
Well, it can, but we have to plug it in. And I think we have to go some.
Okay, that's all right. It's okay. It's okay.
Speak loudly.
I've had my cataracts operated on recently, and I get a little fuzzy until I get my new glasses. Already, I've been instructed to provide chapter 2, where my life has been. I'm not going to go. We've already talked about growing up in Mechanicsville. Various jobs and work experiences, schooling at St. Mary's Academy, Riken, then Georgetown University College and Medical School. Probably because of experience in the various trades and workforces, surgery seemed to fit me. Surgical rotation at Children's Hospital with Dr. Judson Randolph and the surgical resident from Cornell Bellevue, Dr. Greg Norman. They had the big influences on me ending up in Bellevue, the Cornell's division of Bellevue for my surgical internship. Surgery, the reason it seemed to fit was surgeons are fixers. Medicine didn't like, pediatrics I didn't like, OB/GYN, oh my God, and psychiatry was even worse. But surgery just seemed to be fit, but that's probably my experience of coming up in the trades. Cornell, through the problems of politics in New York City, Cornell moved their program to North Shore Hospital in Manhasset, and that's where I finished my general surgery training in 1971. Draft was in existence. The very plan, which I talked about last time, put me in the Navy, and I started on active duty July 1, 1971. After 3 weeks in the Armed Forces Staff College in Norfolk, where we did our orientation, got our uniforms, we tried to make naval officers out of us. I flew to Naples, went aboard the USS America, CVA 66, and started my 6-month Mediterranean cruise. I was the staff surgeon on the America. Interestingly, and one of the things we've talked about in the past was our dialect, our language in this area. First night on board the ship, sitting down at the middle management table for dinner at 1800 mess. Old Lieutenant Commander, the DCA on the ship, looked at me and he says, "What part of Southern Maryland are you from?" Just because of my way of saying out and about and things like that. He had nailed me. He had been down at Pax River at some time. Another story from the old ship. Every so often we would have formal dinner at the middle management in the mess, and we wore our dress blues instead of work uniform. Well, I had a dress blue uniform that was my wife's father's dress blues from World War II. I had changed from the commander stripes to lieutenant commander stripes to fit mine, and I sat down at the table that night, and one of the other old guys looked at me and he kept looking at me and says, "What's the matter? What's wrong with you?" He says, "There's something about that uniform, I don't understand what it is, but it just doesn't look right. It looks different." I says, "It's the left-handed eagles on the buttons. The buttons currently, the eagle faces to the right. In the old uniforms, they face to the left. And I had kept the old buttons on the uniform. But his uniform went back to sea." Aviators on the ship got an award every time they made 100 carrier arrested landings. They were called centurions. Well, in the medical department, common surgery on the ship during deployment was the opportunity for men to get a circumcision performed. That was a common operation. My corpsman, at the appropriate point in time, built a white cockroach about so long out of bandages, adhesive tape, and paper, and I was known as a circumcenturion. of the medical responsibility during deployments with all of these young sailors with high testosterone levels and no women around was going into port, they found social company. And that in turn created, well, it was a source of income for many of the port areas because many of them were poor and the women were the providers for the families. We'll not talk about what they provided. But at any rate, control of the venereal diseases was a big responsibility of the medical department. We used to have all kinds of classes before we went into port to teach the young guys about the problems of venereal diseases, contact, etc. I had a young corpsman, a young striker, second class, a striker in the medical department for striking for corpsman. And he had been a very smart boy. He'd been listening to all the talks and everything else. We went out, went to port, came back out, went to sea, and next thing you know, he's standing in line in the VD line. I asked him, I says, what in the hell are you doing standing in this line? He said, Doc, I don't know. He said, I did everything exactly what you told me to do. I said, well, you go through things step by step and let me know. So he said, well, he went through the whole thing, and he says, but it was so good, and I only had one condom. And he said, I had to do it again. So what I did is I turned the condom inside out and used it over again.
Oh, God.
Some things you just can't judge. And you don't know where Subic Bay is, a little bit like Subic Bay and Alongapo, but we used to go ashore. The carrier would was always anchored at, tied up at Alongapo Pier, which was down in Subic Bay, as opposed to Cuby Point, which was up where the air base was. We had to walk into the pier, you walk out through the base, and then out into town. You cross over a bridge, and then you went to the town, and there was a T intersection. Every division in the ship, and we talked about this last time, every division in the ship had their own place where their people went. The medical department hung out in a bar that was right at the T to the right, half a steps down. Well, knowing my responsibilities, and at those times I always wore a pair of Wellington boots because it keep the ladders from tearing up the back of my ankles. When I went ashore on Liberty, I would always stick a couple packages of you-know-whats in those boots. I always sat on the corner at that bar with my San Miguel's, and somebody would come up behind me, tap me on the shoulder, I'd reach in my boot. That was my contribution. One of the things that some would not recognize, but this was back in the days of there were no women in the service in the fleet. In fact, one of the times we had the woman come on the ship, it was the only time that I know of that we had a woman on the ship, and there was some kind of a photographer who was on there for 2 days. And during those 2 days, we lost a helicopter, went down in the sea next to us, and we blew a high pressure steam engine down in the engine space. They were considered a Jonah, and we couldn't wait to get her off the ship to stop all of this catastrophe. But there was and I learned this actually in the med cruise first, there was a day that was called PCO Day. We won't go with you know what it was.
Yes, I know what it is.
We won't say what the P was, but the CO was cutoff day. And that was so that it was the last day that you could encounter certain ladies of the night, acquire the disease, become symptomatic, have it treated, and be safe to go home. And that was called PCO Day. And everybody knew what it was. When I was in the Subic Bay, it was during the rainy season. And I mean, it poured. We get 30 inches or more rain in the course of the month. Well, going out to the pier where the ship was, there was a ditch along beside the pier that had been developed. Well, there was so much heavy rain that ditch was filled over with water. Most of us just accepted the fact that you're going to get your lower legs, your shoes, and your head wet. You put your jacket on, you button it up tight, everything otherwise underneath the raincoat stayed dry. Well, I had one obsessive compulsive type of corpsman with me who he was going to stay dry everywhere. He had his umbrella, he had his boots, and he had his long cut coat. Well, we're coming back from Liberty one night, and everybody's got the head hanging down, everybody looks like a bunch of drowned rats. And we had a few, to say the least. And we hear this cry from out behind us. We turned around and looked, and here was this guy. He had walked into that ditch, and he was standing there with his umbrella, water up the air. He got his even. That's it. Okay. That's probably enough Navy. Let me see here, a little bit more. So after 13 months on the USS America, I was transferred from the ship in Subic Bay back to St. Albans Naval Hospital on Long Island. There I served as a staff surgeon for the remainder of my time on duty. I was released from active duty 30 June of 1973. Started my practice in Mechanicsville July 1st, 1973. Have been there ever since. One of the people who had a big influence on my practice and my starting was Dr. Abut. Many of you, the older folks, would know who Dr. Samadi was. Sam was a very special person. Had a little personality that a lot of people didn't like a whole lot, but he was honest, he was straightforward, and he gave a damn about his patients. Sam, very early in my career, told me the story of a family, and I hope I'm not repeating this story, but about a family who had, back in those days, insurance payments came to the patients and to their families, and they in turn paid their bills. And Sam told me was a story about a family who had kept their payment and did not pay his bill. And one night, late at night, he got a call to the emergency room about a child from that family who was in the emergency room with abdominal pain. All the way in, and of course, this was in the back of his mind, thinking about this bill that hadn't been paid and how they had cheated him out of his fees. And all the way in, he kept talking, he was trying to talk himself out of how this child did not have anything wrong with him. He got into the emergency room, examined the child. As soon as he laid a hand on the belly, it was obvious this was an acute abdomen. The child needed to be operated on. Took the child to the operating room, had a ruptured appendix, the operator on it. Child did fine and went home, did well. And he used that as a lesson to me, to never let money interfere with your surgical judgment. And that's something that I have always remembered, and it has stuck by me. Probably cost me a lot of money, but anyway, I never regretted that somehow or the other that I had done that. One of the other, a couple stories from those times. There was I've talked about my language. There was an old fellow by the name of Elmer, who I was caring for years ago, early part of my career, had a lung cancer. We sent him up to have a chemotherapy radiation for his lung cancer. And he was down in one of the rooms in the old hospital. Elmer had grown up with my father, and they used to rabbit hunt together. They rabbit hunted on Sundays, because that was the only day they had time. Well, Elmer had the conflict, had the same dialect that I had grown up with. Even he knows what it is. And I used to go in and check on him at night, in the room, and he was as dark as the ace of spades. And we would go in, and I would go in the room, and I didn't turn the light on, didn't need to. And I'd stand on the side of the bed with him. Elmer, all right, Doc, all right. We carry on a whole long conversation. I came out of the room, and back then the nurse always made rounds with you. I came out of the room, the nurse looked at me and she said, "What in the hell did you two say?" I couldn't understand a word you had said. But like I said, when I got around people who have the old accent, you fall back into it, and we carry on a whole conversation. She never understood a word we said. There's another story from down around, my wife, I had told you about the fact that she was a New Yorker. Born and raised in Long Island, New York. We met in college. That was her heritage. Well, when I got home, started my practice, she would answer the phone at the house. There was an old fellow who, down around Loveville, who called one night, said, Rem, something. She said, somebody called, but I don't have a clue who in the hell it was. It was Raymond Somerville. And he went, Rem Somerville. And she didn't have a clue what that was. A story from down around Chaptico.
Stories there.
Yes, there are. I'm trying not to get into any personal stories.
Oh, please.
There was an old gentleman, an old farmer, who I had operated on several times for other different problems, and he had developed a hernia. And in fact, he had an incarcerated hernia, and I operated on him as an emergency. He was doing well and was post-op, and back in those days, everybody stayed in the hospital for about a week after surgery. Making rounds one evening, I said to him, I says, how did you get this hernia? He says, what happened to you? He said, you didn't have a hernia when we operated on you for this colon problem and stuff. And he says, well, Doc, he said, I've been raising some pigs, and I had this old sow that had died, and I said, well, what did you do with it? Well, I said, I really didn't know what to do with it because I didn't know what it died from, but what I did is I pulled it up on a cart with the tractor, and that's probably where I got the hernia. And I took the cart out to the farm, out on beside one of the big gullies, got it next to the gully, and I rolled the sow off of the cart, and rolled it down the bank into the gully. Just left it there. At that time, the curtain pulls back on the room. You son of a bitch. Now I know where that pig came from. It was in my mash box. The guy in the next bed I had also operated on, he had a still down in that gully. And when the old fellow rolled the pig down the hill, it went into the mash box.
Oh my
These are
God.
the stories, but you know, these go on and on and on. One of the interesting things that happened in the past was a problem here. You know, medicine today, transportation today, and everything is entirely different than it was back in those days. We were pretty isolated down here. When we had somebody who had major trauma, major difficulties, major surgical problems, it was a problem to get them up the road. Well, at that time, the University of Maryland started, and Dr. R. Adams Crowley started the Shock Trauma Center up at the University of Maryland. And what we had to do is, if we had to say somebody was in a major accident, big head injury and all kinds of crushed up, things like that, we had to ship them up the road to the Shock Trauma Center. Well, to do that, we got a helicopter, came down, used a state police helicopter. They came down. The helipad was up on the top of the hill from the emergency room. And we would have to do is take the patient out of the emergency room down under the basement, come up the hill to the helicopter, put the patient on the helicopter, fly him to Baltimore. And when we did that, of course, the family was up there all the way, had to go all the way to Baltimore. And then if we were running by land, we had to transfer these patients all the way to Baltimore. Well, about that time also, and this became a progressively big problem. About that time, and I didn't look up the years and that sort of thing, but I got to know at the Washington Hospital Center, Dr. Howard Champion, Dr. Marion Jordan, Dr. Vic Paul, and Dr. Mario Golikovsky. They were the four surgeons who were the trauma surgeons that started what was called the MedStar Trauma Unit at the hospital center. Got to know those fellows pretty well. I even actually had to go up and give a couple of talks up there. Rural trauma, rural medicine, things like that. And developing that rapport with them opened the door to be able to make it very easy for us to transfer patients to MedStar unit at Washington Hospital Center. That created a ruckus in Baltimore, and Dr. R. Adams Crowley got one of the state police helicopters to fly him down here and to meet with us about sending patients to Washington instead of sending them to Baltimore, because it was hurting his income. And that's fine, the meeting had no effect. Well, that produced a very effective relationship. They came down, they taught some trauma courses down here for us with the emergency medical services, and we had a very fond relationship. But that was the MedStar Trauma Unit, not MedStar as it is today. They have assumed that name, and it has grown. For me, with the arrival of Dr. Cox and Dr. Wise back in their beginning of their practice, they brought a very high grade of orthopedics to this area. And my training in orthopedics, though it had been broad up to the point in time where I was still in residency, it was behind the times as far as joint replacements and things like that. And the hand was passed over to where they began to do the orthopedics, which was at that time a big percentage of my practice. During my time in the hospital, I served as the vice chief of surgery, the chief of surgery, the vice chief of staff. During the time I was vice chief of staff, Dr. Gene Boazo, who was the chief of staff, developed a back problem. I had to have back surgery. So I spent half of my period, my 2 years of vice chief of staff, as his chief of staff during his recovery period. Then I served my period of chief of staff, and then I served as the medical staff representative on the board of directors. Had all kinds of committees. The one that I probably is the most pleased with was I was the cancer committee chairman from 1974 through 2006. And basically built that program up to where it was. Enough said about that. Let me see here. We're getting close to the end.
Okay.
All right? I gotta find my. Yeah, I'm gonna open up for a few quick questions. So the things that influenced me, heritage, I still mumble. I still live in Mechanicsville, St. Mary's County. I cherish our history of the county. I'm serving currently as president of the St. Mary's County Historical Society. I spoke about my father, and how much influence he had on me. I'm still serving in the rescue squad that he helped to establish. I was president for many years. I was also president of the County Rescue Squad Association for 28 years. I think I've got 58 years in the rescue squad now. Still living in the house that he built, still cutting the grass he planted. I still miss him and think of him very often. Education-wise, I have a very high regard for education. We talked about St. Mary's Academy, we talked about the old brothers at Riken, we talked about Georgetown's influence, etc. I'm on the board of trustees at the College of Southern Maryland. Have very strong feelings about the importance, not just of academic education, but trades education. When your toilet won't flush, you don't need a PhD. You know, it becomes very obvious. I'm very impressed with the Center for Trades and Industry up at Hughesville that's just opened. I would encourage any of you who have an interest in that every third Saturday of the month from 10 to 2, there's an open house there. And my God, if you have any exposure to the trades or any interest in that, it's go there and see it. The things like the welding shop, the HVAC shop, the plumbing shop, electric shop, you name it. They are incredible. And what opportunities that opens for, just as we were talking about the kids who are not academicians. I have a son who couldn't get out, all he could get out of school was with a vocational degree in agriculture. Couldn't pass the test if he had to. He's probably my most successful working with HVAC and can fix anything, can do anything. Had it not been for the trades and exposure to the trades, we wouldn't have had it. At the same time, I think the military plays that opportunity, and we don't see much of that anymore. Awful lot of that's gone by. Speaking of the welding lab up there, one of the trades that I never learned was the trade of welding. I was down at this past Monday, we had a collaborative meeting with the Seafarers Union down at Piney Point, establishing a mutual agreement with them. And we're sitting at the table talking about this, and I commented about the fact that they had this incredible welding lab, which is one of the trades I've always desired and never learned. And it started trying to convince me that I needed a board of trustees going to taking the welding course at the welding lab would be a good thing to do, you know. And you know, it's not a bad idea. I might just do it. Okay, that's enough. Any questions that I can answer?